So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen from around the globe. My name is Robert Straw. I'm the CEO of CEIBS Switzerland, based in Oregon, here on the lake. The picture you see behind me is the campus that we have. If I was really where I'm sitting on the picture, I'd be sitting in the water. Welcome. Thank you all to the around 200 people that are already on the call. This is one of the webinars that we have in this series of webinars called Lessons for Leaders from the Pandemic Crisis. It's the third webinar series that we've had, and it's the first time that we're working with GDI. Thank you very much. I'll come to that in just a moment. I'd like to give you two plugs of information. You saw that on the screen maybe when you were waiting. One is our next CEIBS webinar coming in next week on the 29th on the role of 5G technology in the COVID-19 era. And that's hosted by one of our professors, as well as an external professional, Luca Valentini, who works at Huawei. The other thing I'd like to mention and give a short plug for is the GDI event, their famous 70th International Retail Summit. They've done this now for the 70th time, so it shows the international weight of this particular program. It's the Urban Retail Summit 2030. That will be taking place on the 10th and 11th of September. At the end of the presentation, we'll send you again a link to this. During the presentation, if you would like to ask and pose a question, we kindly ask that you do that in the Q&A section at the bottom that you can see. And we will try to get through some of these questions as we go. Currently, we have 222 people on the call, so we won't be able to get to all of the calls, but we've got some of our team in the background. Hannah, thank you very much for organizing, and Ingrid on GDI side. We'll be looking at some of the questions to pull out that are screaming at us to answer. Very pertinent information came out this morning in the Swiss news. Switzerland is a small country of about a little over 8 million people, but it's a nice microcosm to look at this particular topic of purchasing behavior. And the particular article that came out mentioned some very interesting purchasing information versus last year. So this is a graph that was shown in the popular press today here in Switzerland, looking at the purchasing purchasing patterns and behaviors of people who have an account with the Post Bank here in Switzerland. And I just want to point out in the beginning, this is a comparison between the same purchasing period a year ago. So it's the percentage of a year ago. So if we look at the top one, obviously communication and media, we all are spending more on Netflix and on Zoom and on MS Teams and things like that. We're buying more on computer equipment because we need all this equipment to have webinars like this. On the other hand, we're seeing supermarkets, people, buying stuff online because they're afraid to go out there. And at the bottom, clearly in Switzerland, it's a very Swiss statistic, the amount of people who are going up on the mountains with the cable cars has gone down by 96% because there are no tourists and there are no cable cars in operation. But this is kind of a microcosm about this whole topic today about what are the changing patterns of consumerism and what of this may stick going forward. Before we start, before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to warm you up, the 261 people attending, with two polling questions. So what we do is we'd like to get some inputs about your thoughts on this topic before we actually hear from the speakers, Jeongwen and David Bosshart. Maybe Hannah, if you could launch the first poll. So can you see the poll, everyone? Have you purchased something online since the lockdown began that you wouldn't have normally purchased? So just click on yes or no. And two, do you feel your purchasing behavior has changed permanently or for longer term due to the lockdown? Are these habits that are going to be continued going forward? Yes, my purchase behavior will continue to be different, or no, I will go back to how it was. So I'll just give you about 20 seconds to answer this. Can they see the poll? when you end it. Okay, thank you. So about 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. So let's see what the results look like. So I'm actually surprised. Only 61% have purchased something online that they wouldn't have normally. 39% of you say no. That's, to me, an interesting fact that maybe David or Jeongwen could pull up on later. The other question of, do you feel like your purchasing behavior will become a permanent habit? 44% of you say yes, and 56% of you say no, it won't become a permanent habit. It is a temporary due to the situation. That's very interesting. So thank you for doing that. We might be coming back to this, and we'll share these results with you. So today with me virtually in Asia, we have our own Professor Jeongwen Chiang. He's a Professor Emeritus of CEIBS. He does research and quantitative analysis covering competitive analysis, consumer choice theory, and the measurement of consumer satisfaction. So he's a real expert in this area. He's also travels the globe speaking on this topic. He teaches in our EMBA programs and MBA courses since many years, and is a consultant to many, many organizations around the globe, such as Xerox or HSBC or Merck Pharmaceuticals. David Bosshart, based in Switzerland, is the CEO of the GDI, the Gottlieb Duttweiler Institute. And this institute is the first think tank in Switzerland. It's a European think tank specializing in trends of research, trend research, retail, economic, as well as social issues. David's specific expertise is on consumption and consumerism as well as the retail and the supply chain, amongst others. He's had also many publications, also regular speaker around the globe. I'd like to turn the word now over to Jeongwen. Jeongwen, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody can hear me? Good. First, thank you for having me here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the things that I'm going to present. And before I start, I hope everybody listening or watching stay safe and stay healthy. I'm in part of China right now, and as you have heard from the news, China that pretty much has come toward the end of this epidemic, at least from what we have seen and what we have learned, seems quietly dying down, and hopefully that everybody would resume the normalcy to some degree. And so in some sense, China is in the learning curve ahead of you, and many of you that you might feel still in the heat of this, be patient, because I think this is going to be blow over sooner or later. Anyway, let me just share some of the task or the homework that Rob gave it to me. Try to tell my audience here that what's the consumer behavior change, particularly in China. So let me pull out this PPT first. And my talk will be roughly only 10 minutes-ish. And so let me start it with this, some of the statistics that very similar to Rob just shared with you. So first, this is the a recent survey done by a local research firm, and they look at the Baidu. You might know that Baidu is equivalent to Chinese version of Google, or a knockoff version. And they also have this keyword search by the people online. And I highlight 3 things over here. Apologize for this Chinese, but I try to translate it into English. 93% of the keywords keyed into the Baidu are all related to the idea try to avoid public places. Well, this is not just saying the government have a lockdown, prevent people coming out. In fact, in reality, people also, even though it's opening, for example, in China right now it's open, most of people still reluctant to go out. So you could see that people still scared of this virus. And then the other 87% of this is about life changing, okay? A lifestyle change because of this epidemic. That's a key message here, and this is the presentation I'm going to talk about. is what have happened to Chinese consumers when they face the epidemic. What did they change? And obviously the other one, they worry about the recession is coming. I'm sure this is the headaches for every government. And indeed in China, we also face the possibility we might have mass unemployment coming out, okay? Anyway, so we're gonna talk about this lifestyle change kind of behavior. This is similar to the chart Rob shared with you, Chinese online shopping during the epidemic. The left-hand side of this is about 2019, last year, before everything happened. And you could see that, you know, as every society would have this, you buy a lot of these shoes and bags and the food, drinks, and all these things. The top ones are pretty much we are quite familiar with. Toward the end, jewelry, etc., is much smaller version. But during the epidemic, you could see this dramatic shift and drop. So the bar chart you see in the right-hand side, you could see that the two highest items are food and drinks and fresh food. And now they have dropped, although you could see that it's not dropping so much relative to, say, other items, because eventually this is still essential things, right? But this is the topic we're going to talk about is homing in 3 industries. One is in the food and beverages, about what we eat. And the other one is about the health-related products, medicine, health products. It dropped somewhat, but you know, you could see still remain relatively same in the percentage-wise. And one more thing is about the apparels, shoes, and bags. It dropped dramatically. And obviously, people stopped going out to shop, and so this number is not surprising either. So the rest of the presentation, I'm going to focus on these 3 elements, okay? So let's look at the food and beverages, the things we eat. And because the epidemic started close to Chinese New Year, you might know that Chinese New Year is roughly almost 10 days long vacations. Everybody was very happy and going home, have home reunions. So it happened in this very critical time, and when people are prepared to enjoy their lives and the big break. And suddenly it happened, and obviously the ones suffer the most are the ones we eat, particularly like restaurants and all these kind of business. And these statistics show you the drop is just so sensational. More than 90% of restaurants just completely shut down. 94% of these families stopped going out, and the whole consumption of the restaurant lost about 80% of it. And so this is not unique just to this 1 or 2 restaurants. It's the whole country suffer from this. And Chinese New Year, even though it's a short 10 days also, it amounts about 15% of annual revenue. You can imagine you suddenly lost 15% of this. And so the implication or the impact is dramatic, because most of the Chinese restaurants, or maybe the restaurants in general, is heavily rely on the cash flow. It's a heavily cash flow oriented business, and suddenly it dry out. And even as big as this chain have thousands of stores, they said that they can only last 2 or maybe 3 months. And most of them had trouble to deal with the landlord, to get a rent reduction. In particular, labor had to be furloughed or the layoff, etc. So in essence, that for restaurant business, they are really got hit the hardest one. And I'm sure in your part of the world is the same. And some people say, well, what about a takeout? Well, it turns out that takeout did not come to help. First of all, because you need the delivery system. And even though China has a very good delivery system, unfortunately, when the people lock down your neighborhood, the food cannot be delivered to your home. They can only to the doorstep of the neighborhood. And people would just rather stay home and cook themselves, and they are afraid of the in contact with the people who deliver food. And to make things worse, that some of these delivery systems rely on the platforms. There are a couple of platforms in China, pretty much the oligopoly kind of settings, and they try to put salt on the wound and raise the commission fee. So in essence, the restaurants got a double whammy. They cannot rely on the offline, and their online cannot come to the rescue. Anyway, let me just briefly saying that they are trying very hard, but unfortunately, all these measurements are very limited. They try to reduce inventory. They try to maybe donate the food. They try to all kinds of corporations and try to prevent and all the food got rotten, and get the supply side to help them as well. And on the other hand, they try to beg for the finance, go to the banks and go to government, ask for the bailout. And then they ask the employee to help out and maybe cut the pay, or even only paying the minimum wage, and go to landlord and negotiate rent. So all these things are pretty much what the restaurant business try to do. And obviously that many of them could not make it. As we speak today, many small restaurants are already belly up. And few ones who can remain opening, even as we speak today in China. The better one probably can resume about 60–70% of business. The rough ones probably only 40%. So still a long way to go. So we anticipate to see some business will really go bankrupt and disappear. And when they're at home, obviously, just like the Rob's showing you, we changed the way we order online. And in Chinese, the family, it turns out that they stay home and eat a lot of pastas, rice, and all these kind of grains, and then cut down on the fresh meat and the fish, etc. And obviously, that's because of it's difficult to deliver this kind of fresh seafood or meat online. And on the other hand, they also find it interesting that many people start to use the online system to order fresh food and fresh products, etc. So you could see the right-hand side of the bar chart is that this is the first-time user. They suddenly need to use this app to order food. And in the past, they would rather just go to the neighborhood stores, and now they just rely online. I think this is very typical. And so to sum up that what we observed during these couple 2–3 months, that Chinese family instantly increasing the demand for ready-to-eat food, instant food, semi-processed food, as you can imagine, like Campbell soup type of the, products, or instant noodles and things like that. And they started shift to online purchase, heavily rely on online. And as I mentioned, in China, the logistics still pretty convenient, despite that some of the disruptions. But by and large, you live in big cities, you can order online. The problem is the supply, because of the farmers have tough time to get their goods to the city. So even you can order online through app, you may not get it the very next day, or even have a rationing on certain of the products. And they obviously get scared how long it's going to last, so they start piling a lot of food at home, and as you can imagine, but they will go for more well-known brands, and these things that with more safety assurance. So this pretty much, you can imagine that everywhere in the world are facing the same situation, and I'm sure this behavior pretty much will be universal. Let me quickly move on to the another industry, that fashion industry. Obviously, you stay home. Well, you don't have the social occasion anymore. So you quickly recognize that you don't need so much a wardrobe, and recognize you don't need so much of makeups and all these kind of things. On the other hand, you had time in your hands, so you started to maybe put more, buy some product or skincare. And this some of statistics showing that during the Chinese festivals and the shoppings dropped down dramatically in this industry as well. And people stopped going to the shopping mall. Despite the lockdown did not happen just yet, but people already heard about the news, so they stopped going there, and the shopping mall completely became empty. That's pretty much the behavior happened in this industry. And then because this is happening, and people start wondering that, is it going to coming back? And this is probably jumping ahead, but this is the curve I'm showing you. Some projected that it might be sooner or later to come back. But so far, all the evidence, including the right-hand side, bottom right-hand side, showing the people who actually, even though they might go online buying things, but they are really cut down on the demand. So in essence, this is an epidemic that make people aware that they don't need so much of this clothing and personal items. And so this is pretty much happening. And on the other hand, that they also worry about losing income. So they were more conservative and also cut back and maybe go for low budget fashion product. If someone says the lipstick effects, like there. And demand for more practicality, more functionality, all this as you can expect it. And so somehow the people believe that you make people understand we don't really need fancy stuffs, and more of a make it work, and budget conscience would rise up pretty soon, and in fact ensuring people's purchase. So in sum, that now for this industry, overall, people have less desire for shopping. This is in general, okay? And in particular, obviously, no interest to go to offline stores, and still happening. If you look at the right side button, this is a drop of people going to shopping mall, and it's just like a cliff. It just suddenly disappeared. Right now, it's almost close the end of April, and I could tell you for the city I'm staying right now, I went to shopping malls. We go in there and we could see perhaps only 1/10 to maybe 1/8 of the traffic compared to it used to be. Okay. And obviously that because of scale of the virus, and people desire for more convenient, unattended try-on experiences, which means that the virtual try-on, virtual sort of like AI technology perhaps has a future in the future. Now, what about the well-being industries? Well, the well-being industry, as you can imagine, people suddenly aware that immune system is very important. So you could see the big jump, people buying vitamins, all kinds of try to boost your immune system and energy, etc. Okay, so this is the two curves showing that the big jump for that kind of products. That's not surprising. And obviously the face mask and sanitizer, etc. A big jump, and this is not surprising either. This is all related to try to get yourself safe and healthy. The interesting part is the older age groups of a society, particularly in China, many of the older generation really don't know how to use smartphones, and now they are forced to do that. So we also see the interesting shift of the older generations that traditionally avoid this online ordering system, but now they have no choice. You could see that the jump of that percentage going online, even for the older generation, to buy medicines, to consult with the physicians, etc., etc. Okay, so overall, after all this, what's going to happen, or what's the projection after the epidemic, which we hope that soon to be ended, on the food industry, that because of this kind of ready-to-eat, self-heating, and instant food, we believe that it's going to continue to grow, and people get used to the idea that these things are actually edible and fast. So I think this direction is still true. And obviously online and non-contact delivery system had to be there. People were scared of this context. So the other thing is a close attention to hygiene and safety. So it become a little bit more permanent feature. And you could see that even for Chinese government try to send out guidelines in the future, how restaurants should operate, and try to try to raise the bar, so to speak, of how Chinese restaurants or any public gathering to pay attention more about preventing these things happening. On the apparel and footwear, the headache right now is that the huge inventory is piling up for all these companies. And so they are trying their record brands right now, try to reshuffle and integrate all sales channels. And it's very funny to see sometimes in your WeChat circle, that in the Chinese social media platform, sometimes you see, for example, that I have a student who is a hire, which is a manufacturer for appliances, and suddenly sharing in his friend circle of underwear. And so, God, why underwear? Because they have a big group of business units, and they try to cross-sell and try to promote and try to get rid of inventory. So they have urged every employee, including the high-end managers, to try to do these stupid things, try to get rid of inventory. And obviously the social gathering will be limited, so boosting demand for indoor footwear, loungewear, etc. And some brands need to temporarily shut down, reshuffle, and restructuring. This is going to happen. Lastly, that on the epidemic and the well-being, demand for a home health-related product continue to grow. Like I said, the vitamins and all these kind of health groups, health products. And online medical consultation assistant platform will get more attention by the VCs and investors, and particularly by the government. And demand for some kind of disease prevention medicine, vaccinations will permanently increase. I think these people are more aware of the importance of stay healthy, okay? Lastly, this is the last chart I'm going to share. This is a comparison between China versus the other many countries. If you look at the right-hand side here, this is red dot means China, and blue dot USA, French, Italians, and UK, the 5 countries compared here. And this survey is across 5 countries and ask citizens, what would you change in your spending in the next 6 months? We're not talking about a lifetime, it's just next 6 months. And every single, there are 40 categories or 40 items. Would you decrease your expenditure, and would you increase the expenditure? So on the vertical axis is plan to cut down. So you can see that from 0 going down to 60%. And the horizontal is from 0 to 60% you plan to increase. Now, each single dot is the proportion of the who think they are going to reduce versus who think they are going to increase. And then you have the 2-dimensional dots here. You could see that in the 4 quadrants here, the left bottom here, obviously the consumers think they're going to cut down their consumption dramatically in the next 6 months. And you could see that more dots, blue and green and gray. While the Chinese, you could see a lot of dots on the upper corner part, because that means that they are going to cut down slower, cut down a little, and increase more. So in essence, Chinese looks like maybe they are already in the tail end of this epidemic. They have become more optimistic, while the Western country, at least, is still in the midst of it. And obviously a little bit more conservative, and probably thinking that the impact of economy is going to be much more severe. And so that this is a very interesting contrast for these 5 countries. Anyway, that's what I have at time and share. So in essence, I think that this epidemic has changed temporarily at least, the behavior, and you probably, I bet, is quite universal across different countries. So it'll be interesting to see that some of them will be permanent, stick with us. And if that is the case, obviously the brand or manufacturers or supplier need to adjust accordingly. And I'm thinking that we probably can open discussion in that regards. Okay, so that's what I have, and hope that you get some information. I'm more than happy to share this PowerPoint with you if you request it, and I will go through the system to post it. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and Rob, you can just have David take over, I guess.
Yes, exactly. David, we're going to switch right on to you without going into Q&A. We're going to do the Q&A at the end, okay? Great. If you can share your screen, David. Thank you. Jeongwen, thank you very much. Very insightful. We'll come back to you in a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me all? It's okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be all among of you. And I think for me, it's really probably the biggest adventure we're witnessing right now globally with this crisis, because there is no escape hatch. We are all part of the game because we're living in a more digital world where we are going to be more connected than ever. The first question I want to address to you is, we all depended on the role model of the US consumer that emerged in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and everybody started to become a huge consumer and a spender. The big question is, after that crisis, will this model still prevail, or will we define consumption totally different? For me, it is clear that we have at least 3 stages of transformation we can try to distinguish, and they might overlap depending on the consumer and the consumer people you're looking at. Can we switch to the next chart? Yeah, probably, yeah. So the first stage is we are still in, probably China is a little bit ahead. It's the virus pervaded economy. We were all shocked how fast that happened. And the formula might be very simply said, it's the basics of life, meaning you do have access to food. You are not hungry. You can eat. The second point, of course, is you have delivery available, because as you all know, when you still go shopping outside your home, what we witnessed, supermarkets were the winners, but not the big stores, but rather the mid-sized and the small stores, because people had fear of contagion. They know about all the hygienic issues, so they were very cautious to browse very quickly, go in very fast, go out very fast. So the second part is delivery. How can I get things delivered if that is possible? And the third point, of course, is we see that healthcare is becoming a permanent issue. So can I shop safely? Can I commute safely? Can I really have the chance to move safely? So social distancing is something that is here. And I think the social issues might even be more important than the economic crisis, because if we have socially problems, then also the economy will not prevail and will not recover well. Interestingly, when you look at home office, how fast people get used to home office, it's very interesting to see that most who do home office, they live in a luxury prison. Luxury prison means they have everything available. They have beer, they have toilet paper. They can easily live a Zoom lifestyle, but for how long can they do well? How long do you want to live with your dog, with your wife, and all together in a small luxury home? So these are questions we do not grasp right now what that means, because the big winners were the big commuting spots like convenience stores in the train stations. It was the airports. It was, of course, the gas stations. They were all dramatically losing sales over the last few weeks. So it changed very rapidly. Places where you paid very high rent, now also the big losers. Think about it, that's very important. But on the other side, you see many, many positive, very humane reactions among people as the virus and the crisis unfolds. People now understand this is not normal. So they look much more, how can I help out? How can I help my neighbor? For example, in Italy, it was very humane to see that the younger generation in small villages, they went through the street with food. Older people who were vulnerable were standing on the balcony. They let down a pot and people said, what do you want? Do you need pasta? Do you need tomatoes? And then with a string, they could pull it up and then they had food. And in terms of, can you pay? Oh no, sorry. And the young people said, okay, we'll find someone else to pay for you. So this is very good. And I think also in supermarkets, you see, they rapidly learn to be also very humane with people who have no more money or people who are vulnerable, can't leave home, have no access to the internet. How can we cater to them? So you see a lot of positive social innovation also, which makes me quite positive that we can stand this crisis. But when you look at the last point, this will be in terms of consumption the most interesting. What means everything else? We cut down on so many things because we perceive that it's not necessary to have a decent life. So whenever this crisis might be over, what everything else means will be very, very interesting. And we will see what that means. Let me switch to the next one. Oops. Oops, can I go back? Oops. So. Well, do you get that? Yeah, got it. The semi-normal mood means that on one side, we are back to normal.
David, I think you need to, really. I think you need to hit the screen, the share screen again. We don't see it.
Okay.
Try it. Let's try it again.
Okay. Oops.
There we go.
You got it?
Perfect. Thanks.
Good. Okay. This is the virus limited economy. And we see now new or transformed customer segments emerge. Of course, don't underestimate, there are still a lot of people who are cash rich. And especially for the younger generation, it will be interesting to see who were easy spenders. Will they still buy luxury products? Because many of the younger generation, we think, will experience a phase in their life where they lose their job. But you have still a lot of upper middle class people who are cash rich, so they can go for the luxury items, they can afford whatever they want. But as I said, it will be difficult for the low income and the middle class, the middle income households. What will their mindset be? What will they go to? I think Jeongwen correctly mentioned that basically we see that online is gaining momentum more and more, even among the elder generation. And I think they learned now how easy it is to order online. I think this will certainly prevail. But we see the vast majority might tend towards thrifty spending because the fear out of losing your job, you stay still in the first stage of the survival mode. When you think about consumers, never underestimate the memories they have and the ingrained experience of their parents and their grandparents. I can remember that when my parents in the 50s bought a house, one of the first things was they had a pantry. So they had a special section in the house where they had preserves, where they have canned goods, because they know they had to prepare for special moments and for crises. Why? Because they experienced the Second World War and they were very cautious in spending. So their mindset was much more saving and not spending whenever you can. But the modern US mindset is spending as a consumer because consumption is good for everybody. And so I think that the thrifty spending part will be quite large, because this is an experience where you can say we had a past where we had to spend decently. Probably the most interesting, and I think Jeongwen already mentioned it a little bit, those who are focusing on quality, like the conscious spending group, I can do it with quite less, but I want better quality, I want sustainability, I want clean air, I want no more pollution, so I think before I buy. So I'm becoming a conscious consumer. The example, probably the best example, is fashion. When you look at the younger generation especially, but also my generation, we used to be heavy users of fast retail, meaning you went to large chains like Uniqlo, like Hennes & Mauritz, like Primark. You bought very cheap fashion items. In general, when you look here in Europe at the younger generation of girls, 20-year-olds, they have 120 pairs of shoes. Will they still be in the mindset to buy more pairs of shoes when they know probably you can do better with less? Probably also you can repair shoes because it's good quality. You look for the service level. You look for the long-lasting product and not just throwing it away and harming the environment. So these will be questions that are very interesting. Will the group that is conscious spending, will this group also say, buy less, choose carefully, choose wisely, and make the product last? Will this group be bigger? I think it might be bigger. You see that already in food. So you see this group is saying, I refuse to do the old pattern. I reduce the number of consumption. I reuse it, I repair it, I recycle it, and then I'm fine. So we see that when you look for it briefly, what that means for companies, you see that we will see faster automation. I think this will be a very important aspect to look at closer, because with AI and more robots, we will have also a very different world. So when you look at the real effect is probably in terms of technology that COVID-19 pushed us already towards 2030 within a few days or a few weeks. So we would predict that we will see more last mile automation. We will see much more self-checkout kiosks we already see in China. We see in the stores much more floor care robots. We will see more autonomous delivery systems. And of course, when you look at the robots, they have a lot of advantages. They cannot get the virus. They cannot get the virus. They are immune. They don't need any protective gear. So it will be also, we will also see that we will ask much more from the company side, what adds value to the consumer Is it a human being in the stuff, or is it more a robot? We have to be very clear about that. But the most important thing is really about what will go on with social distancing. How will people behave when they always have to be, even in intimate situations, to have to keep distances, 2 meters? Look at the restaurant industry. You're not there just for eating and drinking. You're there for having fun with other people. So it will be very interesting to see what the most hit industries, like restaurants, like the airline industry, another very interesting case, or football stadiums, what they are going to do in order to overcome the crisis. We think that normalized spending will affect a certain group, but this will be definitely a very, very small group. So let me now finalize with an outlook. What will be, ladies and gentlemen, 2 years from now, the good life for consumers? Because consumers want to be happy. They just don't want to eat. They want to have a good time with other consumers. And the biggest question, I think, globally is, how do we deal with debt? Household debt, government debt, company debt is reaching new heights. How can we deal with that? How can we cut that down? Or will we basically push that to the next generation? Again, the social impact is, for me, it is the most decisive. Will we help out our neighbors? Will we help out the vulnerable people? How can we make them be included in our society, not be just the leftovers? The other question is, what will happen to fast urbanization? We already see, when you look at bookings at Airbnb, with home office, very interestingly, more people go to the rural side. They have no dense situations with others. So the most interesting thing will be see what are the housing prices, the leases in large urban spaces, and people order more, and people tend to spend more time in the rural area. They don't have to be afraid of hyperdensity. Again, home office is here to stay. How will we just, what kind of furniture, what kind of living room are we going to have over the next years? And then, of course, less consumption, more savings. We see that already when you look at what's going on in the US, what's going on in Germany. People are very, very cautious. So will this really dramatically change forever the consumer as the driver of many, many changes in our businesses? And of course, we will see more moving towards the virtual side, live streaming, virtual reality and entertainment. I think it is going to play a much bigger role, especially when you look at sports entertainment, when you look at live entertainment, what is going to happen there with social distancing. And also, of course, with augmented reality, when you're in your small home office, AR might help you to experience your space in a new and different way. And finally, of course, what is the structure of the jobs? Jeongwen correctly, I think, mentioned it. We see probably more flexibility, more agility, meaning that probably we have less employees, but more people on demand. And this is another social challenge. So this is my brief overview. Thank you.
Wow, where do we start with the questions? I think I wrote down 15 questions just in the short time that you both were speaking. This hour goes by so fast. The chat function at the bottom of the page is just scrolling up, filling with very, very interesting questions and Q&A. Before we do that, you asked a very interesting question just now, David, on the spending behavior, and we've actually, we did something to support you. Let's ask the audience that question. Where are you to the audience of 1, 2, 3, or 4? So Hannah, if you could launch that poll, where are you right now on the spending spectrum as David described it? Are you aggressive, conscious, thrifty, or normalized? I'd like to see. We have 300 people to poll right here as a, it's being adaptive right on the spot. We didn't plan this in advance. We literally created this poll as David was speaking to be adaptive. Let's see what comes up. And this is exactly what you predicted, David, that, you know, we have 200 now have answered, and it's going towards conscious, right? So let's give it, we've got 230 now answered. Let's.
Bob, can you ask the question? Our audience might probably be middle class, upper middle class. So the thrifty part, happily for our audience, is probably a smaller segment.
Yeah, we do have. I think the demographics here are automatically skewed towards a particular more.
Yeah.
I've got to be careful how to say this, but in a more thrifty mindset. So let's view the poll. Okay, 73%. There it is. That's fantastic, right? So your predictions are just proved right here with how many people answered this. Over 250 people answered. So that's amazing, right? We'll make sure everybody gets this too. This is not, again, we didn't plan this in advance. This is really an on the spot to see. Quite interesting. 249 voted. Great. Thank you. I'd like to, what we typically do in these is right at the very end, we ask two distinguished guest participants to give their immediate feedback on what they've heard. I'd first like to go to Simonetta Carbonaro. She's the general manager at Realize Strategic Consultants, and she's an advisory board for the GDI Retail Summit coming up in September. Simonetta, would you be willing to share 1 or 2 minutes just about your immediate impressions and reactions?
Thank you. Yes, of course, with pleasure. Many thanks for the two outstanding presentation. And here is my question. So I don't know if you came across that popular meme making the rounds at the moment that says, it's funny how the economy is about to collapse because people are only buying what they really need.
Yeah.
And I mean, if it is true that the world is in such a global wartime against the virus, and if it is also true that we will overcome it, what about the trauma that will remain? Mm. Of course, people have not stopped consuming during this time, but we understood in a very different way, and less, they bought also less. But apart from some recent, also very hyperbolic overconsumption of some particular items that were clearly indicators of fear, like toilet paper, or of the literally self-baked search for protection inside their own home walls, like bread, flour, and in general, all the typical new normal homebody consuming behavior that you have been also so nicely describing. Apart from that, it is true that today the many people understood how every one of their single consuming gesture is deeply dependent from a dramatically interconnected world, and how we are only as strong as the weakest of its link. And so the real question is, couldn't a trauma like this not only pervading our subconscious, but also transfer into a global, more conscious consumerist movement, driven by people that will start asking individually and collectively to themselves the very simple question: why am I spending this dollar? To whom am I really giving it? And what greater good will my dollar serve? And couldn't this be the beginning, the dawn of a new consumerism that in a way also synthesizes, melt together all four of the spending attitudes that David was describing before, by synthesizing them, but in a different direction, which could be the seed or the direction of the design of a new model of prosperity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I like this idea of social contracting. We're going to come back to this in a minute. Also, when we look at the dialogue of what's happening with consumerism in the East and in the West, to have a dichotomous view of this. I'd like now to turn it over to Armin Meyer. Armin is the managing director of Boyden Global Executive Search, and he is on the CEIBS Advisory Council working with me here in Zurich. Armin?
Thank you, Robert. Just two thoughts I would like to add. You asked the participants, including myself, about their buying and consumer behaviors going forward. And 73% of us said, well, we are going to be very conscious going forward. It would be nice to ask the same audience maybe in a year's time to see whether it has really happened or not. In addition, it is probably, is it good news or is it bad news? In fact, a big part of our economy depends on the fact that we buy clothes, for example, and we don't wear 50% of them. So we produce and produce and produce, and therefore we actually have a lot of jobs which depend on that, in a way, bullshit buying behavior. I'm sorry for using that rough word. So I do hope, and I marked myself also as being a conscious buyer, and I hope this will last in a way, because that would be good news for the world in a longer term. But again, I think we should look back maybe in 1 or 2 years' time, because my belief is that people tend to forget. People tend to lean towards convenience. And the question for me is, will we go back to the US kind of behavior as David mentioned? Are we the US inflicted consumers again, or will there be a very new normal indeed? Mm. And the second thought quickly is, Corona for me is, like maybe many crises, is a booster or a catalyst for trends which have emerged over the past years already. Digitization just being one of them. Yes, now we are working like in a digital world in a way, because if you imagine Corona 10 years back, we would have had a hard time to actually work at home as we do it today. So I believe that we will actually change our behavior, and we will actually be different in a way, but maybe not forever. So thanks very much indeed for sharing all these interesting insights.
Thank you, Armin, very much. I'd like to point on something a little bit touchy, a little bit sensitive. And in this particular audience, we probably, I don't know the number of countries, but on average, we're usually having about 25 or 30 different countries represented on these types of calls and webinars. This particular one, with more than 285 people online right now, I can imagine the spread is even bigger, from the Americas to Asia to Europe to Africa. Those particular areas are heavily dominated in our events. But coming from CEIBS, we're often looking and thinking about the cultural differences. Do we see, a couple of you, Jeongwen and David, hinted at, maybe this is a unilateral effect. Do you have any thoughts about cultural differences in post-COVID consumerism? Do we merge, or do we go back to our cultural differences?
Well, I think that's a very broad, very interesting, very important question. We cannot see what comes after what comes next, but what we call the next reality, we see that we are probably having quite a long time, many, more than just a few months ahead, where we say we are more local people. First of all, it's important that our neighbors, my community, is doing well. So I think the most hit industry for sure over the next month, probably even 2 years, 3 years, will be the airline industry. How can they cope with that kind of change? I think this is difficult. When you look at I think it depends also on how fast we can get vaccine. And we see that the earliest time frame that is given is no longer 12 to 18th month, it's rather 2 to 3 years, meaning we will live with the constant fear that there might be another wave, there might be a comeback. And for the airline, which is like the restaurant industry, very heavily depending on cash, depending on high fixed costs. So for them, it might be the most difficult to just restart the engine again. Also, when you look, Emirates said yesterday, they will just not feel rose anymore. They will have fully hygienic coverage, meaning you're no longer allowed to bring anything else than your laptop on the plane. You have to wear a mask during the whole flight. You have to wear gloves during the whole flight. So this is like going to a restaurant where it's basically a hygienic exercise. I think people will cut down on travel. And the biggest impact, I think, is for tourism and for the whole sports events industry, when people tend to travel less if there is no vaccine available and distributed in due time. I think then we will have a major backlash, and we see already local tourism is thriving. Why do you have to spend your vacation 5,000 miles from here when you can have a decent vacation 200 miles from your home? So I think these questions of geographical distance will be the most interesting over the next few months.
Thank you. Jeongwen, maybe you could address the idea, again, I'm going to press it a little bit on the cultural side and the differences. On the one hand, we look at we're all people, the world is becoming more human, but is there an aspect of social contracting for the Western, for the Asian, or specifically for the Chinese consumer?
I think this epidemic, in my view, is really putting to the end of this so-called globalization. And so I personally believe that from now on, people will be more divided in the sense that you look at reactions from different parts of the countries, and that's not to mention about pointing fingers from those politicians, but from all these social media, I pay attention with my colleagues day to day, and I find out that the sentiments of not relying on the outsiders are getting stronger and stronger. They recognize that the globalization has benefited, for example, China greatly in the past 20, 30 years. But suddenly, even though today China is on the way out of this, their economy is not going to resume very fast because all these orders and exports are diminished to be almost non-existent. So the globalization means that we all on the same strings, and then nobody can immune from one of these pandemic. But because of this kind of a situation, I think the East and West, or this culture, so the identity as well as cell resilience is going to be much stronger than before. So I predict that perhaps I'm saying only from this part of the world, I believe that China, particularly Chinese people, will from now on saying that, hey, you know, this let's just focus on domestic. Less on the outsiders, and try to resume our own economy. Only you can serve yourself. So my personal belief is that the consumerism is going to be more diverse than before.
So we were actually in a call yesterday, another webinar with Pascal Lamy. Pascal is the former Director General of the WTO. We had a very interesting discussion with him. And in that discussion, he was very clear with his view, and it matches yours, Jeongwen, about multilateralism being on the decline. Globalization has been increased. It has been somewhat, this is definitely not a political discussion. It's not what the venue for a political discussion, but the politics does have an effect also on consumerism and globalization and multilateralism. And so on the one hand, we become more human than ever in our teams. You see, when I'm at home working and I see you in your living room in your pajamas, I never saw that. And we become closer as people, but more divided as nations. And also, I think you're right, this is going to be somewhat seen probably also in the diversity of our spending habits going forward. We're going to look to our local, making sure that our local firms get the share of the wallet maybe more than they did in the past. Coming out of this, right?
Yeah.
But
I think that's going to be the trend. And there's no turning back in my view.
Yeah. we've have many questions that are behind the scenes that are popping up. I'm going to come to both of you afterwards and send you some of the questions, and maybe we can talk about providing in written form some answers to some of the very interesting questions that are popping up, because we just won't have time to answer them. But we're running out of time now. I'd like to still ask one or two brief questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So you have asked the first question that actually came in about the expectations of current consumer behavior in consumer times. What about shopping tourism around the world? This is happening globally. We go to New York, we go to China, we go to Vietnam, we go to Switzerland for the shopping tourism. David, you mentioned particularly also the airline business suffering. Is this part of the industry dead also for trips of Chinese, the Chinese flights flying into Paris to go buy?
Yeah.
On the Champs-Élysées?
Two days ago, I heard this news that because China now is open economy already, and in Guangzhou, very funny is that I think one of the Hermes store, the luxury brand, they opened their store and they have hit the record in the sense that they've been swarmed by the shoppers and they buy out everything in the store. So this kind of a very funny way of showing that they've been cooped up at home too long, and then they decided to just go to the binge. So in the sense that I think for Chinese to fly out and shopping spread outside of China to go to Paris, go to Milan, all that, it's going to somewhat dampen. And this is, I think that most of the luxury brands in particular are aware of that. And they're trying very hard in China to make themselves more online, more of the, can go through the social media to touch their clientele. So they cannot rely on Chinese going out to overseas. So I predict that this kind of trend is going to at least dampen substantially.
Thank you. David?
Yes, I think I do agree in that direction. I always distinguish 4 flows globally. One is the flow of goods. I think that will be rearranged with new supply chains. The second one is the flow of people. I think we will have massively different situations, as Jeongwen mentioned. I think we are always also going to discriminate who is allowed to take a plane and who is not. So healthcare issues will be predominantly in any kind of nation to say who can immigrate and who cannot. So we see also, I would predict, more private jets. So people who want to fly on the safe side. So for the luxury business, I think luxury travel, they will always find a way out. But for mass tourism, I think there will be the biggest change. So flow of goods, flow of people, less flow of people, rearrangement the flow of goods. Then we see flow of finance. Also with the debt level increasing, we will certainly see more capital control globally. So nations want to control the inflow and outflow of capital. And the most interesting thing you cannot control is the flow of information. That will go up and up and up, and this will be misused for political reasons for sure. So what I would conclude is, as consumers, we should stay humble. We should more go towards what do I really need and what is the proportion of my income I save and what do I spend.
Thanks, David. I'd like to end in an encouragement from both of you. You're both experts in this area, but I'd ask you to think and reflect for a second. What are the to-dos that we as consumers can do to make this a better world to live in going forward from today?
Well, I think I can say somewhat from my personal experience, because like most of you, that I pretty much lock myself home at home. I found that I really don't need so many things, right? This is, I think most of people recognize that you only need maybe a set of pajamas the whole day long, okay? So in the sense that you suddenly you don't need such a big wardrobe, fine? So that you will pretty much, I think moving forward, you will be more conscious about what you need. Secondly, I think you recognize what are important around you. Health, obviously the most important elements. in the world right now, everybody recognizes health is most important. So in the sense that I believe that people will be paying more attention to what they eat, what they diet, and what they exercise, and all kind of normalcy, not try to have the bad habits. And third is about the relationship with your family and the friends. Obviously, this is lock yourself out in the short distance, but you cook up with your family, you cook up with your kids, you cook up with your loved ones, and it will be a testing for how you handle all this kind of tension as well as the good times. So in the good side, I think it will be more bonding for the people. And on the other hand, that it will obviously expose many of the difficulties. But I think as a human, and this is just not as a Chinese, everybody else, is going to be take time using this lockdown time to really have self-reflection and looking what is important for your personal life.
Thanks a lot. David?
Yes, on my side, I would say a lot will depend on how we're going to use tech. So the good use of tech will give relief to a lot of challenges we have right now. When you see also at the consumption at the height of the crisis, it's much more media consumption, it's much more communication tools. And I see that as also, if it is positively done, as a chance to have exercises, to have hints about how I should treat my body, what will be the issue of not just doing exercises, but also retrain people, giving advice in education, also for families, how to hints and clues about how they should behave in terms of learning how to use the time constructively. So the good use of technology, I think, might also help give relief to the waste of natural resources. So a lot will depend on how we will move forward with AI, with robots, and all the technological miracles we're going to have over the next few months and years.
Great interest and very interesting closing from both of you. One closes on the personal touch and the bonding, the human bonding, and one talks about the opportunity of technology. And so we come full circle once again, right?
Yeah.
I would like to, we're running over time, and I would like to say that first we're going to send a follow-up mail to everyone that's on the call as participants. We're going to send you the summary slides that we have here. We're going to send a quick survey for a feedback, as well as registration and information for the two programs that we talked about coming up. I'd like to thank GDI in particular for a great partnership for today's webinar, particularly David. Thank you, David Bosshart, Laura, and Ingrid and Alain in the background. Thank you very, very much for working with us to get this going. And very, very huge thanks to Jeongwen Chiang for your inputs and insights. Thank you, lastly, to all of the participants. Dear participants, without you, we wouldn't be here. So thanks so much. Be smart, be safe, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.